Hello, and welcome to our first 2025 Chartered Accountants Worldwide Network USA Beyond Accounting online presentation. I am David Powell of Chartered Accountants Worldwide Network USA, and for today's event, we're focusing on discussing the impact on the global economy of and on accountants living in an era of energy disruption. I'm in Boston, Massachusetts, and joining me for our first session is Gerard Reid in Dublin, Ireland. Our first session runs for about 45 minutes. We will follow this by introducing our moderator and additional panelist, who will join Gerard for the second session, also of about 45 minutes. This is our panel discussion, which will include any audience Q&A. In joining this event, you will have been prompted to sign into Slido, which is an app we are using to do Q&A and polls. We will also use details of those who sign in to send out digital badges you can add to your LinkedIn profile if you so choose. You can also reference the badge and attending this event as part of your own CPD activity. You will also see a control panel located at the top right of your screen if you're on a laptop, or at the bottom of the screen if on a mobile device. The panel has tabs for Q&A and polls, and you can enter questions under the Q&A tab. And if you see someone ask a question you like, if you like the question, it raises it up the list we're looking at. In session 2, we will be monitoring this list in deciding what questions to ask our presenters. We also have copies of the slides being presented today available for download underneath the screen that is playing this webinar. During the event, we'll be asking 5 polling questions, and we'll give you about 20 seconds to answer. If you have any issue with answering the polls, log a comment under Q&A so we can timestamp your participation. For those of you that are US CPAs and have requested CPE credits, answering the polling questions is a requirement to evidence you have attended the event. At the end of the event, as you exit, you will also receive a short survey. We appreciate your feedback, so let us know how we do. So to kick things off, let's do our first polling question, which is: the accounting industry has an opportunity to become the trusted advisor and assessor of compliance in respect of energy security. Do you agree, disagree, or don't know? And while you're doing that, let me introduce our first speaker, Gerard Reid, based in Dublin. Gerard is consultant, strategic advisor, and investor. He has spoken at some of our Beyond Accounting events in 2021 and 2022. He's a former advisor to the UK government on renewable energy policy and a co-founder and partner at Alexa Capital, an independent financial services business committed to mobilizing capital towards achieving net zero. He is a fellow of the Institute of the Environment at the University of Minnesota and a member of the Global Future Council on Advanced Energy Technologies at the World Economic Forum. He is also co-host of Redefining Energy, a podcast which explores how finance, technology, innovation, markets, and regulations are radically redefining the world of energy. And now let's close the poll and share the results. And it looks like, from what I'm seeing, about 81% agree. Gerard, over to you.
Thank you very much, David. And it's nice to be here again. So listen, before I kick off, I just give you a little bit of a background. My background really is I was a technology analyst for many years. And then I got involved in looking at energy technologies. And then suddenly I became the one-eyed man in the land of the blind. My career went in a completely different direction. But my whole focus has always been in and around advising investors what to do in the energy space, and also then really helping entrepreneurs scale their business and advising them what to do, particularly on the financing side. What this means, though, is that when you're trying to advise people what to do with their money, you really have to focus on the future, and you really have to focus on actually, whether something makes economic sense or not. So that for me is really, really important. It's back always first principles. First principles is, does the science make sense? And secondly, does the economics make sense? So that's just by way of background. What I would say from my perspective, I'm very clear in my head that we are in this era of energy disruption. And I'm going to talk about that. And the energy disruption, by the way, is not just, let's say, renewables, but it's also in the fossil fuels area. There's a huge amount of noise in and around the space. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that and what I see in the market, right? So the first thing I would just talk about is really the big picture. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what I would see as the technology drivers of change. And then what does it mean for us? And in between the change drivers and the implications, we'll have a poll there, and I'll stop there for a break. So first and foremost, what I would just say is the world is electrifying everything. And it has been steadily doing that for the last, for the last 100 years, right? But really over the last decade and a half, what's happened is the world has really gone and electrified at a much faster pace than before. And the reason for it ultimately is the digital devices that are all in our pockets and that are enabling us to actually do what I'm doing here and, sit in Ireland and have you people all across the world and addressing you to do this. Without electricity, this wouldn't have been possible. And these digital devices are the major driver of electricity. The second thing is really economics. And I could just give the very simple example of electric car. So if you're sitting in Texas today, right? Texas has lots of low-cost electricity. Also got low-cost gas and low-cost oil. Well, guess what? It's 60% cheaper to fuel your Tesla with electricity than to take a similar size BMW and fuel it with, gasoline, right? So that's number one, and that's economics. And the second thing is if you go to China, just to give you an idea of what's happening there, China has reached now the scale in terms of EV production that the cost of an EV is the same as the cost of an internal combustion engine. Okay. Now, what this really means is that it suddenly kicks off that market. And that's why today, if you go to China, that's why really 40% of cars, new cars, are electric. It's economics, right? The third point I would make is that what you see going on is electrification of industry, of buildings, et cetera, et cetera. Now, why? Again, the reason they're doing this is because of economics. Okay, it is not regulations or anything pushing this. It really is, okay, it makes economic sense. So just think of it from a data center point of view, right? Microsoft, Google, they don't need gasoline. They don't need coal. They need electricity, right? So they're pushing this electrification. And at the end of the day, the exact same thing. If you're going to put robots in a factory, same thing, right? It needs electricity. So electricity is really being driven a lot by what's going on in terms of industry. The other thing is energy independence. We do live in a crazy world where, whether you're, let's say that you use the example of China there. China has a very clear goal the last 15 years, which is to become energy independent. And so listen, they don't have oil. They don't have really natural gas. So, what do? They say, well, what I have to do is we need to go and generate our electricity on our own soil. And how do you do that? Well, you do that with solar and wind and some nuclear, right? And the economic benefits of that are immense because, China is the biggest importer of fossil fuels in the world, right? So if you can reduce that, has a big impact. And secondly, also from a geopolitical point of view, it's also very, very important. Again, I would say the exact same thing if I'm looking at it from a European perspective as well, right? So that's what I say about electricity. I would also make a point is that we're moving into an era of abundant energy. So if we went back here and 1970, we sat here, we'd be talking about peak oil production. And Hubbard's curve was the famous name for it. Well, guess what? We're not talking about peak oil supply anymore. We're talking about maybe peak oil demand, right? That's quite interesting. Peak oil demand. Why are we talking about peak oil demand? Well, the reason is because you're electrifying transport, right? So the more you electrify transport, guess what? Demand for oil stays weak. So this is the first thing I say. And again, if you look across the world, what you see is OPEC reducing oil production, et cetera, et cetera. The point being, there's too much of it out there, right? The second thing I would say is gas, the exact same thing. So if you take the case of the United States, has doubled over the last 20 years gas production. So the United States is today an exporter of fossil fuels, where it used to be the biggest importer in the world, right? Now, the biggest issue with natural gas is it's difficult to transport, right? So you have to put it, you have to either put down a pipeline, which takes a long period of time to build, or the second thing is you put them into ships. And that's, again, requires infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. And what we see is lots of natural gas, but inability to transport. But that's been sorted in the next few years. So we're going to also see a period of, too much natural gas globally. And I'm not talking about locally, I'm talking about globally, right? We're also moving into an era of too much electricity. Now, why do I say too much electricity? It's not all day, it's certain times of the day. So what this shows is a typical weekend in Germany or in Europe over a weekend. What you see is minus prices, right across the continent. Now, what's a minus price? Minus price is I pay you to take my electricity. I'm paying you. Right? There's so much overproduction in the system that I'm paying you to do it, right? And again, it's not just in Europe. This is also happening in certain of the states in the US. And again, what it is the more intermittent renewables you build, the more that it's likely to happen, right? Now, what I would say to you is that we are at the start of a new industrial revolution, and it's radically going to change our world. And I will make a point, if you look at the first industrial revolution, what you had was coal and a steam engine. Okay, the second industrial revolution, you had oil and the internal combustion engine. Okay, you need a technology and you need an energy source, right? Now, I'm saying we're at the beginning of another one now. So let me talk a little bit about what that is, right? So this brings me to change drivers. For me, the change drivers is all about technology. The nice thing I want to say about technology is you can't block it, right? You block it, then what ends up happening is somebody else uses it, and eventually you're compelled because it's the only way you can compete, right? So we might all say we don't have a mobile phone, but if everybody communicates with a mobile phone and they all use WhatsApp, you sort of have to do the same as well. So I just want to make it, that's what the way technologies work, is that once they get to a certain scale, everybody has to use them, right? So what I would start by saying is, I'm going to call this the electrical intelligence revolution. And electrical intelligence is, remember, go back to what I said about the other industrial revolution. This time it's about AI and electrification because they go hand in hand, right? You can't have AI with electrification, right? So you need to have it. Now, I look at this and say there's 4 core technologies that are driving this revolution. It's AI itself, right? Which is ultimately a software-based technology. It's IoT and semiconductors. In other words, these are the devices that collect the data and pass the data on to other people. It's electrification itself. There's quite a lot of very interesting technologies in that, and it's renewables. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these just to give you an idea of what's going on. And again, these are global trends. I want to just make this point, they're global. So the first one is AI. So I make a point that AI is going to completely revolutionize our lives. And there are 4 big user cases. There's white collar work, autonomous vehicles, power grid, and humanoid robotics. Let me start with white collar work. I have a very good friend of mine who's a former partner in one of the big strategic consultancy firms. And he sent an email today where he basically said, I think we're seeing the end of strategy consultancy. Okay, that's a big statement to make. But the point I'm making is what you've got is exponential productivity gains in the white collar area because of AI, right? I personally would say I don't need a junior anymore. If I need basic research done, I'm using AI to do it. And it's a little bit like having a junior. Just think of it. It's like having a 24-year-old out of university. They've got all the eagerness. They'll go and do things really, really quickly, and they'll make mistakes. It's the exact same, right? Except what I've got is an AI system. So this the white collar work is the first thing. The second thing is autonomous vehicles. It's very clear autonomous vehicles are a game changer. And I want to make a point that the reason it's a game changer is because of economics. It's the cost per kilometer or cost per mile to actually drive an autonomous car. It's just so cheap. You go, well, why would I even own a car? I just go and do this from now on, right? So we're moving into this autonomous vehicle. The third area is the power grid. We've seen blackouts in Spain recently. And what I would just say is the system is really, really complex and becoming more and more complex. And the individual human being cannot be relied on. We have to rely on other tools, and that tool is AI. And the last point is human robotics. Okay, we're at the beginnings of this. We're definitely going to see robots in factories first and foremost. But I can imagine within the decade that I'll have somebody in my house here. I'll have a robot in my house that is doing all the cleaning, probably even does all the cooking. That's where we're going, right? And it's a huge shift in terms of everything. So that's the first one is AI, right? I would say across to this, and you probably don't have a clue about what this is, right? But what you've got is technologies behind this that are the enablers of change. There's semiconductors, there's sensors, and IoT. You've probably heard of NVIDIA. NVIDIA is the leading semiconductor manufacturer globally, and everybody wants to have their chips because they're the fastest, which is what you need if you use AI. They're the brains of everything. You just have to think about these. Every single digital device has one of these. The second thing is sensors. And there are lots and lots of different sensors. There's movement sensors, there's heat sensors. Most of these are tiny little devices, but they're the eyes and ears of machines. Okay, so they're really, really critical to any form of AI. And then the last one is what we call the IoT, Internet of Things, which is the nervous system of the digital system. In other words, how does it communicate, right? So I get into my Tesla, I go to my Tesla, and what does it do? Once I get near the car, it recognizes my telephone. Guess what? I'm able to open it. I can switch it on without a key. That's all because it's communicating, right? And it's got sensors and it's got semiconductors. So just to be clear, these technologies are in the background. They're very, very, very critical to what we're seeing in this area, right? The third point I want to say is electrification. Okay, we've had electricity for 100 years, but the innovation in the last decade is pretty mind-boggling. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what that is and why this is important. The first one is batteries. Nothing happened in batteries for 100 years. Okay, right? Nothing happened. Then came lithium ion. But what's happened in lithium ion is the scale effect is incredible. And also the cost reduction and performance improvements are enormous. So much so that what's happened is it's enabled things, it's the result of it is that, demand is incredible. So just to give you an idea, since 2020, that's 4 years, we've had a fourfold increase in demand for lithium-ion batteries across the world. Now that's led by, it used to be our digital devices. It's not anymore. It's electric cars and it's stationary storage. In other words, using batteries in the power system, using them in the home, all that type of stuff, right? So fourfold increase in electricity in the last few years. And this, again, lithium-ion, all of us probably have a lithium-ion battery in our pocket, or it's literally beside us, right? It's incredibly prevalent technology that we have, right? And it revolutionized the automobile. Without it, we would never be able to actually electrify the automobile. And we are now getting to points where, again, to give you an idea of performance, when I got my first electric car maybe 8, 9 years ago, it had a range of 100 miles. Today, that same car has a range of 500 miles, right? So incredible performance increases in the area. I will make a point, and this is California, is that lithium-ion batteries are also solarizing the world of electricity. And what I mean by that is the sun's out, that big yellow mark, that's all the electricity being generated from the sun in California. And those green bits at the end, you'll see that that's when the batteries kick in. Now, there's 2 points. You could actually say that the red bit is actually gas generation. But actually what you're seeing is the biggest form of generation when the sun goes down is trees in California. And again, I just want to make a point is that if we'd went back 5 years ago, this would have been zero. The reason of this is because of economics again. Performance increases and cost reductions, right? Next area I would like to talk about when it comes to electricity is power electronics. Now, most of you probably haven't a clue what that is, but ultimately what we've got is these devices. Think of it like a transformer. You plug in your computer. Actually, what you've got is a device that actually controls the power flow, because your devices need direct current and you're getting alternate current from the power system, right? So then they move power back and forth. That's what power electronics do. And these are in every single device. They're in your mobile phone, they're in a car, or they can be used for they can be in anything where you have electricity, you now have them in. And what they do is they enable power to flow more efficiently. And what that is it's about reducing cost, okay, and improving performance. And again, I won't get lost in it, but really incredible innovations we're seeing in and around this area. So that's the electricity area. Renewables. The cheapest and quickest way to generate electricity is with renewables. If we decide we're going to build a 1 gigawatt solar park, we could do it in 2 years. If we decide we're going to build a nuclear plant, 10 to 20 years, right? So speed-wise, you're going to go with that. Cost-wise, but you're going to go with solar and you're going to go with onshore wind, right? So just to be clear, this is the reason you do it. So if you need something quick and cheap, you're going there, right? That's what you're doing. I make the point is that solar is the most important of all of the technologies. The reason solar is important is because it's small. You can use it in the garden to power light, or you can power a city with it, right? And its flexibility is what has enabled us to go and do what it did last year, which is there was enough installed last year to power Japan for a year, or Germany and France together. Just think of that, right? The scale. We've never seen a technology come to market in the energy space like this, right? I want to make a point, though. It's not finished. So this is something called, at present, especially in the US, you want to put solar on your roof, very expensive. You get a roofer, there's a whole pile of regulations in and around it. You need to get an electrician to sign off it. Okay, we're now moving to what I call plug and play solar. And plug and play solar, it's in parts of Europe. And basically, you need no electrician. You can just plug it into an outside socket and it's done. That's all you need. Now, why I say this is you can't block that type of technology, because even if the grid operator says, oh, I don't want you doing that, they don't even see it. They don't see it. They don't know you have it. All right. So again, I make the point this is really all about economics in my perspective. Now, I'm going to stop after this, but I just want to make a point is, these are what I call exponential technologies. Now, what is exponential? Exponential for me is a technology that scales globally and much quicker than what we think. And I won't go into all of them, but if you look at AI, solar, batteries, power electronics, semiconductor sensors, they are all exponential. Okay? And I want to go back to the conventional world of energy. There's nothing exponential in it. If you build a gas generator today, it's, there's 100 of them built a year. If you go and look at let's say solar cells, there's about 80 billion solar cells produced a year, right? The scale that we have on it is immense, right? So anyway, this is the technologies that are driving the change as we speak, right? But I'm going to before I go on and talk a little bit about what this means, what the implications are, I'm going to take a short break, and I'm going to give over to the team to run the next poll.
Gerard, just give about 15, 20 seconds and then we can share the results.
No problem whatsoever. Take your time. Should I stop sharing my screen? Oh, no, it's come up. Okay, good. Very good.
It's good. So I think Kieran, we can stop close the poll now, and Gerard, about 65% agree.
Very good. I always like people disagreeing with me. That's good. We'll have a good discussion later on. All right. So let me just talk about what this means. Okay. The first one is, back to that slide, we're in an industrial revolution, which is a huge opportunity and threat for all of us. And I just give a really simple example of it, right? The richest man in the world is Elon Musk. Okay. He's part of this revolution. If I go to China, the two richest men in China, founder of TikTok, okay, we know who that is, and BYD, electric car manufacturer, right? So just that's the opportunities. The scale of the opportunity is enormous, right? The threat is that if you don't actually join the revolution, it's going to be very difficult for you. That's what I would say. That would be the message to all of you as individuals, but also as companies, right? I won't say that AI will take your job, but AI with another human being definitely will. All right. So this is the first point I would make. Also, the second point is you're moving from a linear world to a non-linear world. Now, linear world is where it's very predictable. You can predict year after year sort of what's going to happen, right? You see the trend is your friend. But now what you've got is such incredible speed of innovation. Obviously, there's geopolitical tensions across the world. You've got people going, we need to have energy, we need to have electricity, you need to make sure it's there. And you've got climate elements as well in it as well, right? So this is what sort of is making it, the speed of change accelerate. And that's very, very important. So let me just give you examples of it. AI. So AI has gone in 1 year from failing science tests to outperforming PhD, right? And I remember the first time I used ChatGPT, I think it was 3 years ago. It couldn't do the most basic mathematical problems, okay? Now, no issue whatsoever, right? Again, this is only in a short period of time, right? So this is the first point I would make. But also make a point in terms of batteries, is that batteries are getting better every year, and they're not finished. There's a roadmap, and let's just give you a roadmap here, shows you BYD and CATL are the two biggest battery manufacturers, to give you an idea of the technical roadmaps and what you're seeing. And the more you improve the performance, guess what? You open up new markets. That's what you do. So again, 10 years ago, we were using lithium-ion batteries, but you would never use it in an electric car. Now you do, right? So this is, just to be clear, opens up new markets when you do this. Next point I would say is that AI needs massive amounts of electricity, okay? I just want to say to you that we don't know how much. So Goldman Sachs, you can see what they say, it's like a 6-fold increase over the next few years. Well, then came China's DeepSeek before Christmas, and it uses 90% less energy than ChatGPT, and it's self-learning. Okay, now what does that mean? This is where it gets complicated. Where it gets complicated is, that's great. So what that means, you've got AI optimization over the next, year or two. But actually what it does is it lowers the cost of AI. And if it lowers the cost of AI, what that does is it will allow other applications like humanoid robotics to come in quicker. Now, why that's interesting is all those humanoid robotics, they need food, and that food is electricity. And so then what you'll see is electricity demand go up again. So I just want to make a point, it's really complicated because of the fact that there are new applications coming to market. And like for a really simple example, my Tesla, it's using electricity 24 hours a day because it's got a whole pile of sensors in there. If you go near the car, what will happen is the camera goes on. All of these things have to. So I just make that point is that, AI, whatever it is, will need some form of electricity, right? What I will also make a point is that AI will create new industries. It's not just it's going to take our jobs. It's actually, you just think of the area of robotics. Again, this is Goldman Sachs looking at what they're predicting, is that they're saying it's a $38 billion market per year by 2035, right? So the opportunity again is amazing in this area, right? I will make a point though, is that China's winning. Be really clear on this. China is winning. And China is winning not because they're subsidizing everything. They're doing it because they have been really strategic in understanding very early on the electrical intelligence revolution and what it means, right? And so what they're doing is they're electrifying quicker than anyone, right? You can see yourself there. You can actually see that, if I take the case of the Western world, actually, we sort of, when it comes to electrifying, we stagnated, right? The Chinese have not. They are electrifying everything, right? I also make a point, nobody's investing in this whole area like them. This just to give you, this is clean energy investment, which is factories, it's electric cars, it's, wind turbines, et cetera, et cetera. There, in terms of investment last year, it was greater than the United States and Europe put together, right? And they are also, and this is also very, very important to realize, they're also leading on the technology side. All right. So if you took in the clean energy space, and in particular, I'm thinking solar and battery, it's hard to say. We in the West cannot compete with China. We just can't because of the fact of the technological leadership. So CATL, which is the biggest battery manufacturer in the world, they have 18,000 people in R&D. So let's me put that into perspective. The whole battery industry in the United States doesn't have 18,000 employees. Right? It's just the scale of what China is doing is immense, right? I make the next point I would say is that we are realizing that we cannot do without electricity. Whether it's forest fires in California or blackouts in Spain, if you don't have electricity, you really can't do anything, right? You just think everything grinds to a halt. You can't pay for things. You can't even get gasoline at the station because the pump is electric. You can't put your heating system on. You probably can't even use water because there's no pumps don't work. And I just want to make a point. The current system is not fit for the 21st century. It was built, basically after the Second World War, the bulk of it. And it needs to be upgraded in lots and lots and lots of different ways. Now, upgrade, it means you need to go build grid, and you need to increase grid expenditure. You need to put cables down. There's no way around this. It's not just cables, but at the end of the day, you cannot afford for our people to have no electricity, right? And I'll make a point is if you have a large city that has no electricity for 3 days, absolute chaos. Simple as that, absolute chaos, right? I think AI has a really big role in this. And the reason really is that you have to look at AI as the glue that brings this all together. And what you've got is it's too complex. On the left, there was a historical grid, big power generators, send them over big lines into cities. Pretty easy, right? Pretty easy to keep that up and down because if there's a problem, I just ring the big generator and tell them what to do, basically. You're in a world today where you've got so much going on, so many electric vehicles, so many data centers, so many, the system has just become too complex. And again, remember all of the devices that we have in our homes that are all digitally enabled, right? It's become really, really complex. And that means you have to use AI. I will make a point is that we will build a global power system based on renewables. Why? Well, if we went back to the beginning of the 20th century, we did it in fossil fuels because it was cheap, right? The cheapest is now solar. And I just want to give you an example of Pakistan. Pakistan, very expensive electricity, $23 per kilowatt hour, because of, by the way, of coal. The coal plants just are very expensive to run, and they've got a lot of debts on them and all that type of stuff. It was a complaint put in by the Industrial and Commercial Association there about a year and a half ago, and they said, look, we can't compete with India. And they said, well, government said, well, what do we do? And they said, you need to get rid of all tariffs on Chinese solar imports and battery imports. And without any form of subsidy, no tax credit, they went and put in 15 gigawatts of solar. And that's in a market that's not very big. 30 gigawatts is the demand. This is what happened, okay? And I just make that point is, it's economics that's driving this. It's not, me putting my hand up and saying it's all bad, good for the climate. It's not about this. It's about economics, right? I also make a point is the alternatives are too expensive and take too long to build. So if I'm Microsoft and I want electricity next year, I am not going to go and try and build a new nuclear plant. And just what I would say is the nuclear plants that we are building, this is Hinkley Point, which is built in the UK at present. Most expensive power plant ever built at 60 billion. This is quite a small plant as well. And it's one of the longest to build as well. Okay. And again, remember thinking in the world where technology is changing really quickly and this, that, and the other thing. Do you really want to go and build something that takes 15 years, right? And is likely to be over budget? Makes little sense, right? What does make sense is to go and put in your own generation. So you go and put in solar, you go and put in batteries, right? And again, just to give you an idea, just to give you, just as without subsidy, just pay back in markets there, you can have a look at San Francisco, 10 years. You add a tax credit in there, it's much lower. But the point about it is you'll do this because it makes economic sense, right? I would also make a point is that we have and this is, by the way, is Whirlpool headquarters, production plant in Ohio. And you can see how do they power themselves? They power themselves with wind, with solar, with batteries. There's also a data center in there as well. This is sort of your future, right? Is doing stuff like this. And again, this has been done because it makes good economic sense and it's quick to build, right? If you want to build a factory and get electricity in quickly, this is what you do, right? So what I will say is that revolutions are tough places to invest in. This is Northvolt, which is the European attempt to actually compete with the Chinese in lithium-ion batteries. And yeah, I think they lost 10 billion in this investment, right? So it's tough. I'm not saying that. I'll also make a point is it might be tough for trying to come in and compete. But my God, if you look at the old players in the industry and the incumbents, just to give you an idea, this is the Volkswagen ID3 versus the BYD Dolphin. And you can see the gross margin of this, 20% versus 50%. So yeah, I can tax the Chinese and put a tax on it, but it still ain't going to have Volkswagen because Volkswagen won't be able to compete. So at some point, Volkswagen either has to restructure the business or just can't compete globally, right? And this is the second biggest manufacturer in the world as it now stands. So I just want to make that point. People die, companies die in revolutions, right? Related to that, though, is stranded assets. And stranded assets is when, you build something and you just don't get your money back in it, right? And in particular, I just want to make a point is if you build something where, it's a big, huge piece of infrastructure and you're going to get your money back in 10 years' time or something like that, well, it's tough to build that. Tough to build. And I'm not just saying fossil fuels, by the way, also in the renewable space as well. Would I really go and build offshore wind now? Probably not, right? Because again, just the speed of innovation in those other technologies is just so great. So what I will say, maybe just let me just finish on the positive note, this is from a climate point of view, an environmental point of view, is the world is very close to peak emissions. And why I say that is when China peaks, so does global emissions, and China's very close to peaking. And the reason they're close to peaking is because of the amount of solar and wind they put in the systems, the amount of electric vehicles, and also then what's going on in terms of the electrification of their industry, right? So that's the positive thing. But I will just maybe finish by sort of saying, and take any questions from you, is that it is a revolution. And as I said, revolutions, great opportunities. And the only thing message that I have to you is just, please, you have to invest in the revolution and try and understand it a little bit because it's complicated, but it is going to have as big an impact as either of the last two industrial revolutions we've had. David, over to you.
Wow, thank you. Thank you very much, Gerard. So what I would like to do now is run our third poll, please, Kira. And the third poll, do you expect energy markets in the short to medium term to be more volatile, less volatile, or about the same? So while that poll is running, let me set things up for our panel session. We've got a little bit more time on that because we finished about 5 minutes ahead, so that's great. We've got time for more questions, so keep those questions coming in. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Shane Rogers. Shane is Operational Risk Leader for Global Risk Solutions with Liberty Mutual Insurance. He is also President of Chartered Accountants Worldwide, Network USA. Shane is a transformational leader with global experience in investment banking, supporting sales, trading and capital markets, asset management and insurance reinsurance businesses. As an experienced chartered accountant, He has himself managed a highly motivated team of professional accountants and internal auditors in North and South America. He's a proven leader of progressive and agile global internal audit teams who engage with and support management in achieving the business goals while retaining robust internal controls and promoting a controls-oriented culture. And now I guess let's look at the results of the poll, and I'll pass to Shane. So the poll looks like more volatile is ahead with about 83%. So Shane, I'm going to pass to you to introduce Barbara, or if you prefer, I can introduce her on your behalf. Which would you like?
Yeah, no, thanks, David. If you wouldn't mind introducing Barbara on my behalf, and then we'll kick off the Q&A discussion, the panel discussion. So thank you.
Excellent. So we have Shane, we have Gerard. So now we'd like to introduce our third panelist, Dr. Barbara Porco. Barbara is an accounting professor and associate dean at Fordham University in New York. She specializes in ethics in financial markets and sustainability, innovation, and reporting. She is a CPA and holds a PhD in accounting, ethics, and business, as well as an MBA in environmental management. And with that, Barbara, I'm going to let Shane take over and run the Q&A session. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, David. And again, fantastic presentation, Gerard. Great job, and great to see Barbara here as well. So, yeah, I found that the conversation stimulating. I was sort of jotting down various notes of what's going on. But maybe I'll just kick things off with maybe a broader question for the panelists. So, what's the role? So we sense all the dynamics that are going on in the global energy markets, and there's a lot happening. But what's the role, and what type of role should government and sort of policymakers play in this? And is there, I assume there's a fairly wide variety of different governance models at government and policy models. But could you give us a sense, and maybe ask Gerard first, and then maybe Barbara? That's maybe a topic you've also have sense from the academic side. What's the role of government to make all this happen?
Well, I think the first thing that people need to realize, Shane, is that it is a revolution and that you need to be on top of it. And the reason I say that is because if you're not, what you're going to do is you're going to misdeploy governmental resources and taxpayers' money. And actually, I'm seeing that quite a lot already, is that the money is just going in the wrong places. And that's not in any way helpful. And so I think that would be, for me, be the starting point. And I've actually had quite a lot of discussions with various governments, and they really don't understand the changes that are going on. So, and I see that partly as my own role is really to explain to them in as simple terms as possible. This is important, you know. What I will say is industry is beginning to realize it's important as well. And that's important as well, because then industry then sort of says to government, hey guys, you need to do this right, you know.
Yeah, well, thanks, Gerard. Barbara, what would you add into Gerard's comments there?
I would add that we have to remember the structure of what government is. They're not businesses. They're not driven by the same types of economics that Gerard was very brilliantly sharing as being the driver to this disruption. Governments are nonprofit. They're institutions built with individuals with decades of tenure in employment, and the individuals that are leading our governments, many of them of a generation that is somewhat foreign to some of these technology advancements. So we've got this world with rapid changes in the energy sector, and you've got government not only struggling to try to keep up with regulations, but they're also challenged with trying to adapt how they themselves exist and how they operate their business model. So it's a twofold challenge, and I think it's going to continue to be a struggle before we start to see it settle with some good improvements. And I'll also add that the government and its top leadership throughout the globe, a lot of them have a diverse position. especially in the United States, which I don't know if anyone's noticed, I think I'm the only one with a New York accent here with this webinar. And in the US, you know, we really have very extreme positions. So it's very hard for our government to get anything done.
No, thank you for that, Barbara. That's really helpful. Maybe, Gerard, I just come back, just sticking to this role, the role of government and government policy. You've obviously got vast experience globally. But what countries do you think are doing a good job? I think you probably, in your presentation, I definitely got the sense China's doing a great job, or they get it and they're thinking very strategically. But what about the rest of the governments? Are there any bright lights in there, or is there equally reflecting other governments that are, you'd say, really need to sort of wake up and smell the coffee here?
Well, okay, so I would actually think to myself that there's a lot of small countries that are doing it well. And what I mean by that is I'm actually taking to say somebody like, they probably won't like being called small, but I'm talking about someone like, you know, the UK. I think they're doing a really good job. They're at the front foot of this in terms of allowing innovation to take place in their energy markets, and they understand what's going on, right? So that there are one or two positives. I think if I look at the US, okay, the US doesn't have one energy policy, so let's start with that. But if you look at Texas, I mean, sorry, they're leader in everything energy, right? And actually, the strategy of Texas for me is, it's not drill, baby, drill. It's cheap, baby, cheap. That's what it's all about. Cheap, baby, cheap. Make sure we have cheap energy. And actually, that really, for me, makes the most sense to me these days. Is that, you know, governments need to really focus on making sure that customers and the future customers are not paying exorbitant rates for energy, right? And I would criticize from a European perspective is that our energy prices are too expensive. And so if the electricity price is too expensive, you've no incentive to electrify or to digitalize, even for that matter,
Yes.
right? So the energy cost is something that's very, very important, which I wouldn't have said that a few years ago, but it's definitely very, very important. So the Chinese are very clear that they want to have low cost energy, right? So I think that's critical. I would also say, Shane, as well, that it's also the industrial policy side of this. We understand from the Western point of view how important AI is, but do we understand how important batteries are? Do we understand how important power electronics are? That there are other technologies that are also very, very, very important, and I think we need to bring together industrial policy more together with energy policy. I think I would definitely see this. I think the other thing I would say to any government is, please, some of these net zero goals that they have in place are just so unrealistic. It's just someone sitting on an Excel and putting down, you know, this is what we need at the end. Not helpful in the world we live in today, you know. I think it's much better to look at it from a technological point of view and the fact that resilience point of view, we need to have electricity. Simple as that, 24/7, no way around it, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we'll come back to this topic of resilience a little bit later in the Q&A session. One topic, Gerard, that was very clear across the presentation you made was, you talked about the impact of AI, and you talked about we're going into an era of energy abundance, right? And the different forms of energy and the sort of migration to cleaner, more green forms of energy through solar and wind, and maybe some different types of nuclear power stations that perhaps you'll talk about. But then equally, you know, the sort of slides, I think it was from Goldman Sachs, where, yeah, but with AI, we might need a 6-fold increase in the energy supply to keep all the AI bots working. It's sort of, for most of us, thinking, well, how do we increase energy supply 6-fold in, I don't know, what your time frame was, 5 or 10 years? That seems like it's going to be a bit of a struggle. Could you give us a sense of that? What's realistic? How's that going to play out?
So let's take a step back. Let's look at the different technologies, how you could do it, right? If you go and say you're going to build a nuclear plant, or even, you know, the next generation nuclear plants, small modular reactors, Well, the first small modular reactor comes online in 2030. Let's be clear, probably the first commercial one is 2033. That ain't going to help win the AI race. Okay. Now, you can go natural gas. Yeah. Problem is, you decide you're going to buy a gas turbine today, you won't get delivered till 2030. They're all sort of globally sold out, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then, and by the way, you want to get a transformer to actually supply that power from that big power plant to wherever, they're sold out as well. So you've got a value chain that's sold out at the large centralized level. So that tells you that's not where you're going to go. What you're going to have to do is come up with alternatives. And what we do know is that we can deploy solar in particular and batteries really quickly. And you could probably put in flexible generators, in other words, diesel gen sets or something like that in and around this. And you can actually get your hands on the small transformer, not the big ones. So you do this. So we're going to have to do stuff like this, Shane. And you're seeing this already, right? And so I'm not worried about that from that perspective. I'd be more worried about the fact that you try to do these large projects and you just have to write them off in 5 years' time because, Microsoft says I need it next year and not in 2031,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and I think it was a big surprise to many of us here in the US. I think when we read about, I think 4 or 5 months ago that I can't remember I think it was Microsoft. One of the big tech companies was actually looking to reopen or restart. I think it's one of the 3 Mile Island reactors, a nuclear reactor, which I believe it wasn't the one that I think melted down. I think a sarcophagus at this point, but I think there was 2 or 3 reactors built together, and then it was brand new back in the mid 70s, and it never got fully functional or was turned off. But that just seems a bit of a shock to a lot of people. And it seemed like all the big tech firms, again, Amazon has opened up its nuclear arm, and it just seems like there's a big push towards nuclear power in some of these tech companies. You're sort of listening to you, Gerard. It feels like that doesn't seem to make the most strategic sense.
No, but Shane, let me correct you on one small thing. We're talking about new generation as opposed to opening up nuclear plants that were recently closed. So if you're talking about opening up nuclear plants that were recently closed, like say the German plants, you could open them up it might take you a year and a half. Remember what we said, you want to get gas, you won't get it till 2030, and you won't get new nuclear until 2035. So this makes an awful lot of sense to me, right?
Yep.
And it's very doable. And what you end up with is clean power, and you end up with it reasonably fast, right?
Yeah. So there is a case for that sort of
reopening or
reconfiguring nuclear power stations that might have closed recently, but sort of reopening and actually bringing on a lot of power back online in 12, 18 months or whatever is the time period to reopen a nuclear station.
And you've got a customer straight away, because what will happen is Microsoft will then build its data center beside that facility, right? That sort of makes an awful lot of sense. Really does, yeah.
Okay, that's great. No, thanks for that, Gerard. So maybe just one of the topics that I'm curious, maybe pivot a little towards the world of accountants and even students. So Barbara, you're obviously the dean of the business school in Fordham. And, you're obviously dealing with sort of up and coming MBAs and accountants and people who are pursuing their CPA. How does this whole, this whole sort of energy disruption, the shift from a sort of, into that sort of vastly changing landscape, how does that all factor into the way you're actually going about to teach these topics to students and to make them sort of more knowledgeable? How does that play in? I'd be just curious what's the reality in a big university like Fordham these days?
Thank you. It's a great question. I'll speak primarily from Fordham's perspective, but there are many other universities that are doing a lot of great things in this space. I think of this in sort of a 3-prong approach. The first is you've got to integrate the topic within the curriculum. It's not a standalone course. This impacts all the different disciplines. You're going to feel it in the marketing area. You're going to feel it in the finance area. You're going to feel it in the accounting reporting space. So first, I think about the importance of the integration. Then you want to think about, how is the academic program going to be impacted? What are the ethical implications? How do we manage the university in terms of delivering the types of education we can feel proud of? So the academic program itself is, what are we doing to prepare the students so that when they go out into the fields and hopefully be leaders of the future, what types of education have we given them to prepare them for these new roles? And the last thing that I think about from Fordham's perspective is sort of the practical element of all of this. How are we getting our students to have that true hands-on learning, an internship, research opportunities, ways that students can engage directly with corporate partners? So you're following this broader trend line in terms of how universities are trying to better prepare their students for the energy challenges associated with things like curriculum, interdisciplinary studies, and different types of research initiatives. But all of this comes together in how we do our best to think of education holistically. So it's not just one topic that needs to be a special topic class that we're going to just have in this department, and it's going to be targeted certain students, but this full integration in everything we do. And it's not just what we educate, but how the university sustains itself. We participate in a lot of different rankings in terms of Fordham's commitment to clean energy and to sustainability practices. So we want to live the mission in which we teach. And as I said, there are many universities doing great things, and Fordham is a Jesuit school, and there's a Jesuit consortium within the United States as well as globally. And there is a major commitment to what is called Laudato Si. And for anyone who's familiar, those were the values that were articulated by the late Pope Francis, commitments to ensure that we respect the world that we live in. And all of this is associated with the changes in the energy disruption.
No, thanks for that, Barbara. It's really interesting. And I guess it sort of seems like it plays into that, what Gerard described as the sort of historically the linear world.
Yes.
And so looking forward, the nonlinear, geometrical world, where it almost feels like if you take a step back and reflected on I can't remember what slide it was in Gerard's presentation, it feels like almost like the foundation of business in many respects is with true AI, and the speed of change is actually a lot of what we've assumed in the past has to be challenged, and really sort of there's a new normal has already probably emerged, but it's definitely continues to emerge, and the new normal changes all the time. Is that something that's within the academic world that you see, and that you feel a lot of pressure around that sort of topic?
I think if you're not feeling the pressure, then you don't have the proper perspective. You may have, sealed yourself into the ivory tower, and you might be oblivious to what's going on outside. But if you are keeping current and you're aware of what's going on within your profession, you have to feel that pressure. Everything from controlling students on how not to cheat using AI, from how to use AI more effectively. So some faculty will take a position that says they don't want AI in their classrooms. They don't want it used for any outside work. It's not a realistic approach. And I'm not being specific that's saying that Fordham has faculty to do that. I'm making a general statement. It's all part of the need to adapt. So AI is with us. We have to embrace it. I say something similar that you were saying, Shane, and Gerard about AI, that you're thinking about it as the first year that employee. I joke around saying it's like the unpaid intern. It does a lot of great work, but you've got to look at it when it's done, because it's not really sure what it is that you're looking for. So you can't take the information and just run with it. And this is part of what we want to make sure that our faculty and our students understand that. A lot of changes. And in the construct of universities, faculty tenured can stay with us for decades. And you need to change. If not, everything around you moves in a direction you're not going to be able to function.
Yeah, no, change is the only constant. We talk about it where I work. We
Absolutely.
talk about having not one intern, but like the actual AI and our version of GPT, like having a team of
Yes.
50 being able to do things like that. Obviously, of course, you have to review it and review the output and make sure that it makes sense. But it's very interesting. Sorry, excuse me. I'm just going to go to some of the questions that have come in from the audience.
Sure.
And maybe just some relatively quick comments, because there's quite a few questions here. So just one of the questions that's come in: do you think the U.S. administration's penchant for fossil fuels, tariffs, etc., will put it behind China in terms of tech and the AI revolution? I mean, I know it's a big topic out there in the world, but yeah, is there a sense of winning strategies, losing strategies, Gerard?
No, I'll give you my opinion
say.
on the thing. I think, for example, let's start with AI. If we were talking a year and a half ago, US was quite significantly ahead of China when it comes to AI. And then they decided they were going to ban the export of NVIDIA's leading chips to China. And suddenly China caught up in the US. Now, I say that is because it doesn't work to actually go and, ban your technology from going to another country, because one, it'll go round. But secondly, what do the engineers do? They go, oh my God, we can't rely on them anymore as a partner. We got to do it ourselves. And that's what they did. So I'd be very clear in my head that what tariffs do is they might give you a little bit of breathing space, but you gotta have a strategy to catch up with someone when you use tariffs. And the criticism I'd have with the US government is I don't see a strategy in the other areas to catch up. So for example, what you're doing is, take the case of solar, there's tariffs on Chinese products, right? There's Chinese batteries, there's tariffs on them. Okay, well, all that's doing is impacting the customer. It's making it more expensive for that customer. That's all it's doing. And it's not really helping the United States catch up, So, and I'm saying the US as an example, but I think any country, you have to be really clear in your head. If you do put tariffs on, you need to have a strategy on competing or catching up. Otherwise, your companies are just out of business because they won't be able to compete in the international landscape, right?
Yeah, no, that's good. There's another comment here, another question here to Gerard that might sort of kind of, I think, aligns with that discussion. It just said governments are stepping back from taking climate risk and energy diversification seriously. Can the private sector advance in the face of these headwinds? And again, it might be also tie into the financial reporting aspects. And again, it seems like AI, for all the huge advancements in scale and technology, it seems the energy needs seem to almost like, does AI have a big carbon footprint that we weren't planning for? So again, maybe you could talk about some of those concepts, Gerard, and maybe the reporting aspects might also flow.
I'd come out with a premise, which is, I think it's a good thing to not keep going on about climate change and all that type of stuff. I think we're beyond that. Beyond that, from my perspective, it's about economics, it's about energy security, it's about geopolitics. That's what it's about now. It's about energy resilience. So the byproduct of embracing this revolution is I really believe that we will sort out the environmental issues we have across the world. And the environmental issues are just not climate change. We've got significant water issues for a start, right? Air quality issues, and. So I'd be very positive that technology sorts it out. And I would look at the solutions that are out there and I say, they're there. We just need to implement them. That's all we need to do, right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's all about resiliency. The conversation and the obsession on climate and climate warming, it does not land, because you'll have parts of the world that are in frigid experiences, and they don't understand that the warming is just simply a way to describe the changes that we're seeing in the climate. I think if we stop discussing it that way, we'd make a lot more advances in the space that we need to. To me, it's long-term strategy, it's mitigation of risks, it's resiliency, and even the word sustainability itself is long-term value creation. That's what it means. That's what it's all about. It's not about trying to figure out a way to determine how climate is changing. It's how to find a way to be able to manage what we are experiencing and how to adapt to it. So be nimble.
Yeah, no,
Barbara,
absolutely.
I'd add one thing to what you've just said there. I like what you said in terms of sustainability. For me, if a business is not long-term profitable, it's not sustainable.
It's
So
not.
sustainability is really about, maybe it's more about long-term thinking. How can you have a competitive advantage going forward? That's what it's all about, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, absolutely. And it kind of comes into a topic I wanted to touch upon, and it's probably very relevant for the accountants who are dialed in. It's that sort of the concept of, again, going back to the linear world and the non-linear world that's in front of us, or we're currently in. And that, I think you mentioned towards the end of your presentation, Gerard, you talked about stranded costs, and you've just talked about sustainability in terms of financial performance. And it feels, and maybe it's more of a question for Barbara, but it feels like right now, there's a here and now moment when it's like we should be looking at, maybe challenging some of the assumptions around financial values, particularly if you've got a lot of historical infrastructure that may not be particularly useful going forward. Gerard has given us plenty of examples of that. But as a topic, as a sort of an asset valuation topic, is there a lot of discussion around that? Do you see, are the standards that we follow, are they keeping pace? Are they sort of keeping pace with the non-linear world? Because that seems like it's if we try and use what we've done in the last, 30, 40, 50 years, doesn't feel like that will be fit for purpose in the non-linear world.
Well, I think you have a proliferation of frameworks and reporting. There was an expression that was used very commonly, alphabet soup, when you talk about the different kinds of standards that we have in the reporting space of sustainability or ESG. I think we have improved in that area, but who is proficient in it? Who really understands all the different frameworks? If it's the IFRS standard 1 or 2, is it SASB? Is it TCFD, which is now has retired, so to speak, GRI, the CDSB, the CDP. And then you have in the United States, you've got, the federal government had a position that they were going to, make some very important environmental requirements for reporting. And then they stood back and said, nah, we're going to halt this under the new administration. So what else do we have going on in the United States? And I know it's going on in Europe as well, is you've got different cities, different states, different municipalities that are coming up with their own law, like California. California has 3 bills. Two of the ones that they spoken about the most was just 253 and 261. But they also have a bill that requires disclosure for any kinds of carbon credits. So in our country right now in the U.S., we've got certain states that are looking at this. The state of New York is one. We've got Illinois looking at one. We've got Minnesota, Maine. So what we're not seeing on a federal level, we're seeing on state levels. And all of this is part of the need to really understand the environment, but not environment speaking about globally, but the situation that we are all managing our businesses in. It's changing. And there's transitional risk associated with that we have to understand how to manage that. Again, all comes back to the importance of resiliency, ability to adapt, long-term capacity in terms of how you gauge your resources, how you use it, how you restock.
No, thanks for that, Barbara. And I'd probably sort of pivot a little bit and just ask a sort of related question to Gerard. So if you think about we've talked about, energy security and sort of, the abundance of energy and all that and the huge demands of energy, right? But if you really take a step back, I always think about like transition is great if it's orderly, okay? If everything's orderly. But when a transition is not orderly, then you have all sorts of volatility, all sorts of crazy spikes in markets and values and prices. Maybe the question, Jared, just in terms of the orderliness or chaos that might be there in this transition, could you talk about that? Because I know you have a whole podcast built around energy transition, but it's equal. Like, what's your sense in terms of, are we on an even keel here, or are we really, could there be some very big rogue waves coming our way that we just can't see?
I would tend to go with the pessimistic, which would be, I think we've got some rough roads ahead. Okay. And I'll just give you an example of what those rough roads could be. They could be a cyber attack on our power system. It could be a physical attack on the power system or the wider energy system. We've already seen, in the German situation, 2 pipelines taken out. But I think there's frailty in that system. And that's what I would say, number one. And, the geopolitics are just difficult, right? So you just never know what's going to happen in geopolitics these days, right? And so they were the 2 issues that would give me concern. I think the other thing is just the speed of innovation and technology deployment is faster than the regulators and the legislators are able to deal with. So to take the case of AI, right? There's a huge question mark in and around copyright, right? So is it mine? Is it AI's? Is it what? Yeah, but is that just that AI is still doing its own thing and we're developing. We haven't sorted out regulations in it, right? So I think that would be the area where I would sort of look and go, oh, we need regulators and legislators to think quicker and move quicker. And that's where I get a lot of concern, to be honest, right? And so the final thing is, there's lots of, it's all about money at the end of the day, right? So if I'm an incumbent and I'm used to making money doing, burning coal plants, right? And now suddenly I'm going and it's renewables taking over from it. That's tough. So I'm going to block change as much as I can. Again, remember, use that example of Pakistan with their expensive coal plants. You can guarantee that utility was blocking, solar coming on the system for years. And then suddenly you can't anymore, right? So that they would be the concerns that I would have,
Yeah, no, that's great. I've got one more question, just Gerard, and then I think we'll go to our poll that's up and coming. But one of the participants has asked the question: do we think there'll be a new taxation scheme introduced globally, such as an ESG tax, to monitor energy consumptions from wider AI use in industry? Is there any talk of that? Both of you ever hear any topics like that?
Sorry. I can never see that happen globally.
Yeah, I agree,
Never.
Gerard. Yeah.
Never.
Yeah,
I can't even see it happen in a country doing that, because
it's the same.
It's just too important.
Yeah.
Why would I disadvantage myself by doing this? Now, by the way, if I take the case of Europe where I'm living, like, we don't have any AI. We may be one AI company. We basically have to rely on the US, right, for our AI. I mean, that's pretty concerning. And then you want to go and put in regulations to tax the electricity on that AI, and that would be just suicide.
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree.
Okay, great. So, Kieran, I'm going to ask you to open up the next poll. I'm just going to read it out here while it comes up on screen. So, polling question number 4. This question: I have personally experienced at least one energy outage in the last 12 months. Yes or no? I'll be curious to get a sense if the audience has had any sort of blackouts or brownouts, I guess, as they're referred to, and just give you a few more seconds to respond. Kieran, will you put the answers up? I can't see the answers currently, so
About 60% yes.
Really, really.
interesting. Some volatility in our grids then, for sure. Let me just pivot then to a topic. It maybe comes down to the organization, corporate level. Gerard, you've interacted with many corporations and as Barbara in terms of her world in the academic world. But do you see, like, if you take a typical industrial organization with factories and need for tons of power for plants, is there like an organization model these days that says that's optimizing the energy? So, for example, is it commonplace now to see factories with solar arrays on the roof or in their location? Like I think you had one of your slides that did show an organization that had like the wind turbines in and around their big major plant. But I'm just curious, like, how much adoption of that do we see? Have we scratched the surface, or is that actually quite commonplace now?
Let me say you're only scratching the surface.
Hmm.
And let me just explain why. It was just down to economics. It was cheaper to buy it from the grid in the past, right? But we're in a different environment today where the costs of generating with solar and wind are so low. Plus, you've got the whole thing of resilience. You need backup power. You need, you need batteries. You need diesel gensets, etc. So the world has changed because of, I would say, just really because of technology improvements. And so that's why it suddenly makes sense to go and build these industry parks. And I do want to make a point. If you go back like 100 years ago, right, every big chemical plant built beside it its own power generation, right? And its own furnaces and this, that, and the other thing. So we're doing the same thing in the future again, but it's about electricity as opposed to burning a fuel. And that's the big change. But we're only at the beginnings of it. And really the opportunity is, like, just very practical. Let's say Microsoft decides to do a data center. Well, let them do the data center, and then in and around that, put in food processing plants, right? Because guess what? The waste heat from that data center can be used in those food processing plants. That's the way we have to think. We have to think to ourselves that we're in a new world, and that, Microsoft, these guys, they need electricity quickly, and, maybe you partner with them, right? So we're in a different, I'd say, as I said, a completely different world because of that technology.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
that speed of technology change is not finished, right? It's going, as I said, it's going to accelerate, because using AI means you can control things in an even better way. Because what we're talking about now is, remember, what AI can do is it can say, oh, guess what? Someday there's going to be zero power prices. So guess what you do? AI decides zero power prices. I'm going to turn on the furnaces. I'm going to heat hot water. I'm going to store it. That's where we're going. It's sort of automized and you don't think about it, because listen, none of us really want to think about all this stuff going forward, but that's an opportunity, Shane, because what that means is there's a whole pile of new business models that will come in and around that.
Yeah, it almost sounds like, we grew up, people that know me and Gerard grew up just down the road from each other in Dublin. But, we think about the industrial estate model, where it was just like, factory after factory, sort of just they need whatever spaces they need. But you could think about that model that you've outlined, Gerard, where you'd have a center would be, a Microsoft or a huge, someone that has a huge power need. And then around it is a whole model of other players who need the power, can make use of the excess power, but still it's in abundant quantities. Which sounds like almost like plays across almost like a government type of policy or innovation, perhaps, that could be further,
And
Do you see
Jamie,
much of that in Europe versus the United States? I'm just
it's only
curious.
starting. It's only
Yeah.
starting. But I will say you're also going to see this in the residential area as well, because you can imagine what you do in the residential area is you put solar on everybody's roofs, you put batteries in, you put heat pumps in, which are basically big air conditioning units, and you put in some form of hot water storage. And and you're generating a large amount of your electricity pretty cheaply, right? And you put it into a service agreement that's very different. That's sort of where, in my opinion, we're going, right? So we're going to do things different than we did in the past.
Yeah. Great. No, thank you. Okay, let's just have one or two more questions. Maybe Barbara, I'll pose a question or two for you. So when accounting for energy, accountants should consider the accounting treatment of assets and liabilities, as well as the impact of environmental regulations and sustainability reporting. So what new skills do you think auditors and CFOs need to address these items? What do you think about when you think about those core skill sets?
I think that's a great question. Let me kind of do it in a list. So one of the things that I'm thinking would be to be proficient in frameworks and reporting standards associated with environmental and social and governance issues. So you should know the whole gamut, the ones that I mentioned earlier, all the frameworks, how do they measure, how to disclose, and how to audit the sustainability risks associated with energy use, carbon emissions governance. The second one I think would be imperative is to understand data analytics and how to interpret non-financial information, how to look at beyond the traditional financial KPIs, the environmental data sets, the AI machine learning tools, what kind of data visualization software are you proficient in, whether it be Power BI, Tableau. You have to be able to integrate that into the structure of your organization. Next, important, need to understand what the regulatory environment is. What is the policy in the place that your organization does business? What country are you in? Are you in the US? So you're thinking you have a hiatus from the SEC climate rules because they've been halted, but you're in California, so you've got certain mandates. So you need to think about the regulatory piece because that's going to insulate you from any exposure. And you've got to think about associated with challenges regarding carbon pricing, the taxonomy of regulations, being able to understand how disclosure is going to be different by different jurisdictions. The next, which Gerard focused on, was transition risk. You have to be able to understand it, you have to be able to assess it, and you have to be able to manage it. So skill, everybody should be able to engage in some form of scenario analysis. I remember learning scenario analysis when I was in college, thinking it was just a fun thing that I was learning, but it's a great skill to think about what types of levels, whether it be environmental, whether it be in climate change, whatever it is that the organization may need to adapt to, what types of impact will that have, not only on the way that you do business, but also you've got to think externally. How is it impacting your supply chain? How does it impact your ability to raise capital? All of these are really critical. Another one I think would be important is to be able to value your intangibles. You go back 50 years ago, most of the balance sheet was, tangible. You could knock on it, you could feel it, you could tap it, and it was pretty easy to value, and it stayed on those financial statements, and you went through the traditional way of writing them off through a form of it, whether it be amortization or depreciation. Now, the bulk of what's showing on is your assets. You can't see them, you can't touch them, they're intangible, and it makes it very hard to value. And they are on your financial reports. So you've got to be able to understand how to value your environmental assets, your carbon credits, your renewable energy certificates, being able to link ESG compensation performance metrics, green bonds, anything that is associated with a sustainability element. you have to be able to understand how to audit and how to account for non-traditional assets and liabilities. Another skill imperative, and I know Gerard spoke about it, is you've got to think strategically. You've got to think in a long-term, with a long-term lens. You can't have this myopic focus on what's going to happen next year, or how are you going to satisfy the analysts on your on your upcoming, call. You've got to think about how you're going to align those ESG performance with your financial objectives. And you've got to think about this cross-functionally. It cannot be siloed. You can't have one department within your organization that thinks. Everybody's got to be thinking, and you've got to be communicating. And that communication, to me, would probably be the last piece that I would add to this list, which is that cross-disciplinary and that communication that happens. You've got to have engineers talk to accountants. You've got your legal team that talks to your administrators. You had to talk to the IT people. Yes, we have to talk to the IT people. It has to be more than them just coming over to tell you to unplug the computer and plug it back again, and that's going to solve all life's problems. You've got to be able to have those real conversations, and you've all got to be able to speak this new lexicon, the lexicon that's associated with the disruption of energy and sustainability.
Wow, that's a great list, a recap of topics, Barbara. So thank you so much for that. It almost, when you boil it all down, it really sort of showcases the opportunity for accountants to be that sort of trusted advisor, to sort of
Absolutely.
help promote and challenge, and to make the organization better, and to sort of reflect on all these challenges and sort of take them all on board and sort of help their organizations thrive. It just seems
Absolutely.
like that's the job, for probably one of the key takeaways I would say for me on this, from this webinar. But really well said. Really well said.
I think it's an exciting time to be in this profession.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I have one final question just for Gerard, and then
Please.
maybe a closing remark, and then we'll get to David's overall closing. So just, Gerard, based on everything you've outlined today, do you sense that energy markets generally, and let's say in the short to medium term, more volatile, less volatile? You get a sense of the,
It's more
what are the
volatile.
financial markets like?
I can't even, sorry for cutting across you, but it's just more vol. It's
Wow.
we're actually going into the era of volatility the next 2 years, and I say that across all of the fossil fuels, because remember what you do, and by the way, fossil fuels and electricity, what you have is energy's really been quite easy to predict. You go, oh yeah, population's going up. Yeah, the economy's growing. Yeah, energy demand's going to do this. That's what we've had for the last 40 years. Now suddenly you've got geopolitical disruptions that could throw you one way, right? You've got concerns about resilience, and then you've got growing demand for electricity. And you've got a whole pile of intermittent renewables, which are sometimes not wanted because, and by the way, at some point it'll be wanted, but what I mean by that is sunny day, California, that's okay, they've lots of batteries. Sunny day in Europe, not enough batteries. So we can't build the infrastructure great enough to deal with that issue and to take advantage of it. So that will be where I come from. The next few years definitely going to stay volatile across all energy markets. No way around it.
Okay, no, thanks for that, Gerard. So maybe just a closing comment, maybe from both of you. Again, 30 seconds or so each. What would be the one thing you'd want the audience to take away from the webinar today? So maybe I'll ask Gerard first, and then Barbara. Just give, what's the one thing you would take away?
Speed of change is accelerating, and you need to be on top of those changes, right? Otherwise, you're just going to be irrelevant.
Perfect. For me, I would say be proactive. Don't be reactive. Don't ever think about risk unless you're thinking about opportunities, because you can unlock a lot of fantastic ways to improve your business and to enhance not only your organization but the world around you.
Great. No, thank you for those comments. And I think that's a great perspective that you've both shared. So I think this will probably largely bring us to the end of our Q&A session. I'm going to hand over to David Powell in a moment just to do the overall closing, but I wanted to say thank you so much, Gerard. Thank you so much, Barbara. You've done just a fantastic webinar and learning event for the Chartered Accountants, not just here in the Americas, but all over the globe. And again, we're so lucky to have you both from a great prestigious business school, and Gerard, being really one of the leading global voices in energy, alternative energy, and energy transition in the world. Right? Gerard is, I don't think people realize how influential Gerard's voice is around the world. So we are extremely lucky to have someone of Gerard's caliber and credibility with us today. So thank you again. And with that, back to David.
Thank you, Shane. And now let's, Kieran, run our last polling question 5, which is, are you more concerned about energy security than you were before this presentation? And the options are more concerned, less concerned, or about the same. So take a few seconds to run through that.
We're going to find out if we scared everyone.
We'll find out.
Well, they saw me, that was enough.
So while you're answering the poll, let me say a big thank you and echo what Shane said to our presenters and to you, our attendees and audience. Before you exit, please fill in the feedback survey that will be available on screen. If you asked a question and we didn't get to it, please note in comments and we'll ask our presenters to respond later. We also look forward to you joining us for our next event on June the 18th for Beyond Accounting Leadership Skills. And now let me close the poll. And it looks like 70% are more concerned. So Barbara, I think you got your wish.
You scared everybody, Barbara and Gerard.
We rattled everyone, Gerard.
Oh, super.
We caused everyone to feel a little unsettled. I love that.
And we're ready to close. We've got a minute or so left. So I don't know if I'll ask you each for one comment before we close because we've got enough time for it. So one off, Shane, go first.
Yeah, no, just again, a great learning event. Always amazed to hear perspectives from experts in the field like Gerard and for Barbara from the academic side. So again, I think I just reflect on all these risks as more from and we're all consumers, right? And so much happening in this world around energy and energy disruption that reflects, that impacts us as individuals. And so I take that away as I've learned a lot today. Thank you.
Excellent. Barbara.
I am so privileged to be part of the webinar, and it's so refreshing to listen to Gerard because he's giving information that has no political agenda. It is practical, it is informed, it's realistic, and it's actionable. And that has so much value. And then you have this great moderator in Shane that's able to enable this conversation, hopefully so that it can be digested by people who are listening. So it's really a pleasure. And David, I think you're great too.
Thank you. So Gerard, I'll let you have the last word.
Well, actually, I'm going to follow on from what Barbara said there. I mean, for me, if I look at this, it's actually all about finance, right? Because the finance is facts as opposed to politics, right? That's where I'm coming from. I'm a finance person as well. So we're really important in this world because what we do is we bring facts and we do fact checking.
Excellent.
So keep up the work.
Excellent. So thank you once again. And for now, goodbye.